Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karvavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Samasta Jana Kalyane Niratam Karunamayam Namami Chinmayam Devam Satgurum Brahma Vidvaram Namah Shri Shankarananda Guru Padambujanmane Savila Samaha Grahagrasaika Karmani. Okay, wonderful. So we will read verses 12, just verses 12 and 13 of Panchadashi, chapter 2, and then we will move forward. We'll recap these two verses, we'll move forward. Mano dashendriyadhyaksham hritpadme golake sthitam tacchantah karanam bahyeshwa swatantriyadine vinendriyaihi aksheshwartharpiteshvetat gunadosha vicharakam sattvam rajastamascha guna vikriyate hitaihi. Okay, wonderful. So once again, I'll share the transliteration in chat. So in case you need that, you have it. We're in chapter 2, Mahabhuta Viveka, that Pancha Mahabhuta Viveka, that distinction or discrimination between the 5 elements and the self and the 5 elements between each other. And how Swami Vidyaranyaji starts this text is, first he talks about the Chandogya Shruti, that we are exploring throughout this 109 verses. Sadeva Somya idam agra asid. Then he explains the properties of the 5 elements. And then after that, he explains that from these elements come all of our indriyas, our faculties of knowledge, our faculties of action. And also he explains our mind. So now we are in this portion where last time we explored how he explained the mind. And the mind is what we call the indriya, that faculty of thinking, and it resides in the heart. So we said the home of the mind is the heart, the office is the brain. So it functions through the brain and rests in the heart. And this mind is called antahkarana. Anta means inner. Inner because it uses the sense faculties to perceive the world. It cannot do it on its own. And it's called indriya because it does guna dosha vichara. It inquires into objects about their qualities, their good qualities and their negative qualities, their positive things and their defects. So it inquires into these 2 things. And this is called the mind. And it's so beautiful. The example in your book, if you see, it says, though light is in the whole room, the lamp is said to be the main place for the light. So also the mind is in the whole body, but the special place is the heart. So this is where we're at. And now the mind, it is saying here, the mind is composed of sattva, rajas, and tamas, these 3 gunas. So now he's exploring what these 3 gunas are, or the modes of the mind. It goes through these modifications. So let's read now, verse number 14. I will read, and then you can repeat after me. I'll do the reading and repetition because the splitting is a little hard. Vairagyam kshantirodharyam Vairagyam kshantiraudaryam ityadhya sattva sambhava. Ityadhya sattva sambhava. Kama krodhau lobhayatnau. Kama krodhau lobhayatnau. Ityadhya rajasodhitaha. Ityadhya rajasodhitaha. Vairagyam kshantiraudaryam. Ityadhya sattva sambhavaha. Kama krodhau lobhayatnau. Ityadhya rajasodhitaha. So in the third pada, or the fourth pada, I should say, it's ityadhya. That should be ityadhya instead of ityadhya. So please make sure you fix that in verse number 14. So this mind now, he's saying, has these modes, sattva, rajas, tamas. And we've heard these words before, but just to put it into context, what do these thoughts mean? What do these modes mean? So first of all, when we study Vedanta, we understand that the mind is made up of predominantly sattvic, that the composite of all the elements, the sattvic portion of the whole elements, the sattvic portion of it makes up the mind, right? So the mind is predominantly made of sattva, but it also has rajas and tamas. And that's why we see that the mind, it rests in sattva, means it rests in peace and quiet. We put all kinds of efforts to make the mind rest in peace and quiet. But when the mind is resting in peace and quiet, we don't try to agitate it. Consciously, unconsciously, we do try to agitate it whenever desire comes. So that mind being made of the sattvic, predominant sattvic, samashti aspect, total aspect of all elements, it always rests in peace. It likes to go back to peace. And in fact, everything we do in our day-to-day life is just to feel that sense of peace. And how do we know now what is a sattvic vritti or sattvic thought? Is that of prakasha and shanti, or in other words, knowledge and peace. So these thoughts of knowledge and peace are called sattvic. And then when we analyze what is a rajasic thought, so opposite to peace is disturbance. So those thoughts of the nature of disturbance are rajasic thoughts. So sattva has two components, knowledge and peace. Opposite to peace, disturbance. Those are rajasic thoughts. Opposite to knowledge is ignorance. That ignorance is tamasic thoughts. So in this way, sattva, rajas, and tamas are related. So if we want to know what kinds of thoughts we're having, we just have to see what do they bring us. So here, in the first line, it's all about these sattvic thoughts. Vairagya is non-attachment or dispassion. Kshanti is forgiveness or forbearance. Audaryam is generosity. Iti adhyaha, etc. Sattva sambhavaha, they're products of sattva. So when we look at vairagya or detachment rather, or non-attachment, it brings us a sense of peace, right? It brings us that sense of peace because we're not tied to something for our joy. When we think of forgiveness or forbearance, whenever we're able to endure something, it brings us a sense of peace rather than trying to change things all the time. There's some things that need to be changed, but a lot of things we can endure. And generosity, or being able to give, also gives us a sense of peace. Have you ever cleaned your house or given things away, right? You feel like, so nice, right? So that audaryam also makes us peaceful. So we know that these are sattvic thoughts because they're of knowledge and peace. Then when we go to the rajasic thoughts, they're desire, kama, krodha, anger, lobha, greed, and yatna. Lobha yatna, so it's like a dual. Yatna means effort. Effort here means agitated effort, selfish effort. Desire also here means the desire for the world, that desire that leads to agitation. That is what kama is here, because we know that rajasic thoughts are of the nature of disturbance. They're opposite to shanti. So all of these things like desire for worldly things, anger and greed and effort towards it will cause us a lot of agitation. And ityadyaha, these thoughts are rajasotitaha. They're produced by rajas. So that's how we know the mind has gone in a rajasic mode. We lose our sense of peace. And of course, we've studied this also before and in the Gita. When that desire is obstructed, it leads to anger. That's the relationship. And when the desire is fulfilled, it can lead to greed. We want more. So everything is rooted in that desire. Once we have this selfish desire, we are going for a downhill ride full of agitation is what happens. And all of our efforts will go into only that. And they will be efforts of agitation because no matter how much we try, we will never be fulfilled. This is called a rajasic mind. This is what makes people move and go out in the world all the time. Mm-hmm. Now, what is that tamasic mind? So let's read 15. Alasyam bhranti tandradya. Alasyam bhranti tandradya. Vikarastamasotitaha. Vikarastamasotitaha. Satvike punya nishpattihi. Satvike punya nishpattihi. Papotpattischa rajasehi. Papotpattischa rajasehi. So these tamasic thoughts now are opposite to knowledge. They're all of the nature of ignorance. Alasya means laziness. Laziness means we don't want to do anything, nothing, and also procrastination. We delay everything. They're of the nature of delay, of inertia, of ignorance, of forgetfulness. Bhranti means confusion. When we are confused, this is a tamasic thought. We're deluded. Tandrita, drowsiness, when we become so incredibly drowsy. This is a tamasic thought. These vikaras means these different thoughts, tamasotitaha, they're produced by tamas. So when the mind is like this, know that it's a tamasic mind. Now, how is this useful for us? We know very well that the mind functions the best when it's in the sattvic mood or sattvic state. So if ever I need to make a really, really big decision and the mind is in a very disturbed state, don't make that decision. Wait. If I need to speak to someone on a serious matter and the mind is very agitated, wait. This tells us to wait because we operate best from sattva. With rajas and tamas, our minds are very, very dull and mediocre and disturbed. Now that he said, okay, this is the mind, right? And the mind has sattva, rajas, tamas. Now he wants to tell us what are the results of sattva, rajas, tamas. Aside from whatever I've told you, that when we are aware of the ups and downs of our minds, we can wait or prevent ourselves from doing something really rash, knowing that the mind is disturbed or dull. He also says that these sattva, rajas, and tamas give rise to what we call punya and papa. So here, sattvikehi. When sattva functions, punya nishpattihi. Merit is acquired. Merit is acquired when sattva functions. Then papotpattihi. Demerit is produced when rajasehi, when rajas is there. So what is this merit and demerit? Really, this punya and papa, what we call in Sanskrit, when we have a thought or an action of any kind, when we have any thought or we perform an action of any kind, generally two types of results come. One which is seen right away, here and now, right? So let's say I eat something very healthy and I'm full. I feel good about myself. I feel nice. And that's an immediate result, which we call drishta. But there's also what we call adrishta or unseen. There's an unseen effect or result of action or result of thought that happens. That's called this punya and papa. It's these unseen effects. And they fructify at their own time. So the unseen effects, which are meritorious, which will lead to good things happening in our life, are called punya. While the unseen results of actions, which are demeritorious, which lead to negative things happening in our life, are called papa. So when we think of something, when we perform an action, there's a seen result and there's also an unseen result. And that unseen result fructifies at its own time. Its own time. Whenever it wants to fructify, it will, whenever it's the right time. Where is all of this stored? Where are these merits or demerits stored? They're stored in my antakarana, my inner equipment. So that is what he's trying to tell us in these verses. Okay. Now what about tamas? So we will read now verse 16. Tamaserno bhayam kintu Tamaserno bhayam kintu Vritthayukshapadam bhavet Vritthayukshapadam bhavet Atraham pratyayi kartet yevam loke vyavasthitihi Atraham pratyayi kartet yevam loke vyavasthitihi Tamaserno bhayam kintu Vritthayukshapanam bhavet Atraham pratyayi kartet yevam loke vyavasthitihi Tamasehi, by the tamasic thoughts, na ubhayam means that with a tamasic thought, we neither get merit or demerit. Because generally, tamasic thoughts are that of inertia, of dullness, of laziness, of inactivity and not doing anything. So obviously, when we don't do anything, what happens? We do not get any merit or we do not get any demerit. So that's why some people feel like they should just sleep because at least nothing bad will happen. Or they should at least get intoxicated because nothing bad will happen. Or take in certain substances because in that tamasic state, no good will happen, but no bad will also happen, right? So, but is this the right way to view life? It says, Vritha ayukshapanam bhavet. It says that ayukshapanam, the life is completely wasted when we keep this tamasic state of mind. We waste our lives because we become so dull. And remember, whatever we don't use, we will lose. So guess what? If we stop using our muscles, our physical body, we stop walking, we stop moving, we will lose that ability to move certain things. That's why all of a sudden, when we work out a certain part of our body, you really feel it because we haven't worked it out in a long time. Same with our mental capacity. We haven't used our memory, for example. Now we do not use memory. Nobody uses memory, right? Because everything we can look up. So our memory also, kshapanam, it also diminishes. Our attention also diminishes because we haven't used it. We haven't, means we've used it to move here and there, go here and there, but to really sit on one thing for a long time, we haven't been able to do that. So things that we do not use, abilities, we will lose. And that's a tamasic mindset. So with tamas, vritha yukshapanam bhavet. So now we've seen the mind, sattva, rajas, tamas. The result of each, sattva will bring punya, rajas, papa, tamas, neither, right? Na ubhayam. So now, is that all? Now remember why he's describing all this. He wants to describe our entire composite being because he's going to reject it. He says there's one more component. This is the most important component. What is it? Atra, here. Here where in that antakarana, aham pratyayi, there is that I thought. Aham pratyayi means that I thought, or what we call the ego, or what we call ahankara. Karta means it's the doer. Iti evam vyavastiti. And this is the way in the practical world. So it says here, of the modifications of the mind, that of the I consciousness is the agent. So here you take it to be I thought, so that we don't get confused. In the practical world, we also do the same. So now let's think about this for a second. How does this I thought come about? So we have these thoughts. This is a bottle of water. This is a bookmark. This is a book. This is a book. So these thoughts are fine because they're in our mind. But where did this I am seeing this bottle, or I am seeing this computer, where does this I notion come from? Where did that I just land? How did that happen? This thought is in the mind. This we know. But this I, how do we explain this I entering the thought? How do we explain the I pervading the thought? And that's where Vedanta brings the concept of Chidabhasa. Chidabhasa, or that reflection of consciousness, or manifestation of consciousness, if you want to say. It is like how that sun reflects in a pool of water. It's an automatic thing. That sun representing pure consciousness, the water representing the mind, and the reflection is that ego. That reflection is that ego. So that is how that I enters. It's the reflection of consciousness. And this is part of that antakarana. It's part of that structure, this I. So this I is, it's not pure consciousness. Remember, it is the reflection of pure consciousness. So whenever I say, I am doing this, I am thinking this, who are we talking about? Who are we referring to? That reflection in the pool of water. Not the sun. Not the sun. the reflection in the pool of water. So who's this individual going through this life? That reflection in the pool of water. That is called the ego. We call it ahankara, which means aham karoti. It does I on everything. I did this. I know this. And in fact, our whole entire lifestyle, the Upanishads explain in these 4 words. What do they say? They say, janati, ichchati, karoti, bhunjate. I'll translate in English. Janati means first it knows, then desire, it desires, then it does, karoti, then it experiences or enjoys, bhunjate. So this is all these 4 things is what the ego does. It comes to know of something, then it desires it, then it does all kinds of things to pursue it, and then it experiences or tries to enjoy it. And then does it stop there? It will go. It will know of something, then again it will desire, again it will do, and then again it will experience. And these are like the 4 avatars of the ego. They keep going on and going on and going on. When it says here, karta iti means all of these. It means all of this. This is also part of this whole aggregate structure. It is not the self. It is something apart from the self. The other day, I want to share with you a very beautiful thought. This came in Naishkarmya Siddhi. And when it was trying to explain what a changeless entity is, it gave a very beautiful definition. The changeless entity is the mind, but it's also that which appears to be changeless and recognizes the change. Now, what do you mean? Okay, so let us say, this example comes in Shastra, in our scriptures, right? Let us say I met someone, his name is Devadatta, right? I knew him when he was very, very young, and he had a certain hairdo, and he looked, he wore certain kinds of clothes, and he didn't have a beard or anything. So I knew him as Devadatta, right? And then later, I met him years later, and then I sort of put the 2 together. I recognized that, oh, this Devadatta that I'm seeing now he's grown and he has a beard and he looks different, was that Devadatta, right? So now the object of my thought was changing, that Devadatta changed, right? Obviously that's changing. But there's a presence there that recognized that Devadatta is this Devadatta. There's something there constant that recognized it, right? So it appears that it's changeless, but that's also changing. That's also because that's the ego. Remember, the one that puts together what I saw in my memory and what I'm seeing now, that's not pure consciousness. That's the ego. So even that which appears to be changeless amidst the change is the ego, and it still changes. So catch this subtle point, because sometimes we confuse that to be the self when it's not. How do we know it's not the self? Because it's not there in deep sleep. That is the proof of it. And when we wake up in deep sleep, what is that which puts it together? That's the ego also, not the self. So this is the ego. And this is what we see in the world. Now, what is he going to tell us? Now is where he's really going to kind of drive the point in. He's thinking now, I told you all of these things, all of these components, because this is what I want to get to. So these verses 17 and 18 are very beautiful. So let's see. Spashta shabdadi yukteshu, spashta shabdadi yukteshu, bhautikatvam atisputam, bhautikatvam atisputam, akshadavapi tatshastra, akshadavapi tatshastra, yuktebhyam avadharyatam, yuktebhyam avadharyatam. Spashta shabdadi yukteshu bhautikatvam atisputam, akshadavapi tatshastra, yuktebhyam avadharyatam. What does he say here? Spashta. Spashta, it is quite clear. Spashta means clear. It's quite evident that shabda, that these objects such as sound, sound, what we saw, touch, smell, taste, all of these, shabdadi yukteshu. So these objects which have sound, taste, touch, smell, etc., are clearly discernible as bhautikatvam, means they are products of the 5 elements. So we understand when we look at this world that this is 5 elements. We understand that when we see something, it's constituted of the earth element. First we'll start with space, air, fire, water, earth. We understand because it has the properties of sound, it has the properties of touch, the properties of form, taste, smell. So these properties belong to the elements. So when we see things that have these properties of sound, touch, form and color, taste and smell, we understand that they are products of the elements. So everything around us that we perceive as objects, to understand them as the elements is spashtam, is clear. According to what? According to what we have studied in Panchadashi. Now, he says, atisputam, it's clearly discernible. So it is quite evident that the objects in which sound, touch, etc. are clearly discernible are products of the 5 elements. Now, akshadavapi. But he says, now when it comes to the senses and the mind, how are they products of the 5 elements? When it comes to the senses and the mind, he says, tat shastra yuktibhya. He says, now you have to use scriptures, and yukti means logic, avadharyatam, and this will be conceived of. This will be strengthened by the scriptures and logic. So with the help of scriptural texts and reasoning, it can be conceived that even for the senses and the mind, the subtle elements are the basis. So what do you mean? So here now, first we will explore today now, how is mind made up of matter? Okay, so that's the first thing we will do. This is based again on Chandogya Upanishad. And as I said, we will study this Upanishad after this chapter because then it will be seamless. We won't have to do too much explaining. So in this Chandogya Upanishad, I'll just give you a little background so we understand where this is coming from. There's this son, his name is Shwetaketu, and his father is Udalaka. And Shwetaketu, he doesn't want to go to Gurukula to study. And so finally his parents tell him, you have to go to Gurukula. And he comes back and his father asks him, what did you learn? Did you learn that by which everything is known? That by which all the unheard of becomes heard, all the unthought of becomes thought? And Shwetaketu says, no, my teachers didn't know. He was just saying that, but because he didn't want to go back to Gurukula. And so his father started teaching him. And his father said, okay, I'm going to teach you about that truth. And in the process of teaching him about the truth, he also tells him how the world is constituted of these elements. And so now he's trying to tell Shwetaketu that, look, your mind is also constituted of these elements. What elements? So this is what he says. I'll read to you what he says. I'll explain it. Annamayam hi somyam manaha. He says the mind is made of food or earth element. Apomayaha pranaha. The pranas are made of water. Tejomayi vak. Speech is made of fire. So what does he say? He says the mind is made of food, and he says the pranas are made of water, and the speech is made of fire. And now we will explore a little bit. So what happens to Shwetaketu here? So his father tells him this, and he says, this is what you do, Shwetaketu. You go and you fast. I want you to fast for 15 days, right? Fast for 15 days, but drink as much water as you want. So first the father tells Shwetaketu, okay, I know you learned some mantras and everything in Gurukula, recite them. So let's say he recites some mantras, and then he says, okay, now Shwetaketu, go on your 15-day fast, drink as much water as you want. So Shwetaketu goes on his fast. Now, as he's coming out of his fast, again, his father asks him, now those mantras which you chanted before, now I want you to chant them. And after this fast, he's unable to remember. He's unable to remember the mantras. Why? Because there's no food in his system. There's no food in his system, so he's not able to remember. So his father's trying to tell him that, look, Shwetaketu, your mind is made of food. And in fact, this is the Shruti here. He says very, very detailed. He says, when we eat food, annam ashita, when we eat food, tredha vidhiyate, becomes threefold. Yastavishto dhatu, that which is the gross part of food, it becomes purisha, means it becomes fecal matter. So the gross part of food becomes fecal matter. Madhyama, the middle part of food, becomes mamsa, becomes flesh. And he says the subtle part of food, anishta, the subtle part of food becomes the mind. So the subtle part of food becomes the mind. And that's why Shwetaketu couldn't repeat that mantra. And I bet, when we're hungry, we can't think, right? It's very, very obvious, right? Then he says that even water is threefold. Tredha vidhiyate. The gross part of water becomes mutra, or urine. Then the middle part, madhyama, becomes lohita, becomes blood. And anishta, that subtle part, becomes the prana. So that's what happens with water. Then what's this fire? Tejo ashitam. So who eats fire? This is, the food. Now I forget what the word was. I had written it down, but it's not familiar to me, so I forgot. But that food which has a lot of heat in it. So like oil and ghee, right? So when people eat this food with a lot of heat content, what happens is the gross part becomes asti, the bones. The madhyama, the middle part, becomes fat, aja. We know oily things make us fat. The fact. And the subtle part of it, anishta, becomes vak, becomes speech. So this is also why a lot of singers, people who speak, they drink ghee. A lot of ghee to keep their speech very, very clear. So in this way, he tells Shwetaketu that, listen, your mind is also matter. It's also matter because it's made of food. And this is not something that's new to us, because we all know the direct impact of this. We drink a cup of coffee, we know what happens to the mind. It's very alert and awake. Try sleeping after a cup of coffee. It's very hard. And drink a glass of wine or 2 or 3, and you know what happens to the mind, right? Or eat like a whole box of pizza and try to do some serious Vedanta, thinking of Vedanta. It's not gonna happen. So in this way, he proves that even mind is matter. Through Shastra, through our scriptures, and through logic, through this whole exercise that Shwetaketu did. So that is a big revelation for us. And the mind is also that aham pratyaya, remember that ego, that's also matter. Now, someone might ask, okay, you proved that the mind is matter. And by the way, next week, I'm going to ask some of you to actually, I'm sure in your fields, talk about how the mind can be matter, or based on whatever you know. I think it'll be very interesting to get different perspectives. But one now might wonder, what about the sense faculties? How are they kind of made of matter? So now this is the explanation that our scriptures give us. And again, these are points for us to hold, to be able to understand how everything is an object. Okay, so let me share my screen so that it can be easily understood. Here, right, okay. So now I've shown you this slide before, but this is the logic that they have for, proving that things are, even our faculties are made of matter. So let's say space has the property of sound. This we know. Space, air, fire, water, and earth have these respective properties: sound, touch, form, color, taste, smell. So through space, we know that through space comes this auditory faculty. How do we know it? Because this perceives sound, which is the property of space. From air comes the sensory faculty. How do we know? Because this perceives touch, which is the property of air. From fire comes the visual faculty. How do we know? Because this perceives form or color, which is the property of fire. So it's you get what I'm saying. This is produced by this element. How do we know? Because it's perceiving that which is the property of this element. Now, this gustatory faculty, this perceives taste, and this comes from water. It perceives taste, which is the property of water. The earth, from the earth comes the olfactory faculty, or that of smelling. This perceives smell, and that is the property of earth. So in this way, through this yukti, or what we call logic, our rishis established that even these are products of 5 elements, because they perceive these things which are properties of 5 elements. So this comes with the faculties of knowledge and perception. Now, somebody might ask, well, what about the faculties of action? So there is also some logic in this. So now they say that from space comes the faculty of speech. How do we know? Because speech releases speaking. It releases sound, which is the property of space, right? Faculties of actions are the ones that release. The second is air. So grasping, the faculty of grasping comes from air, because grasping, or being able to release out and touch, comes from grasping, and that is a property of air. Now it says that pada, or the faculty of locomotion, is born from fire, because moving in the sense that we move to see form and color. Most of us move and walk around because we want to see form and color. We exert ourselves to see form and color, which is the property, again, of fire. From now, before when I showed you, sometimes they replace the two, payu and upasta. So just keep that in mind when we're studying this. From water comes the faculty of generation, right? And this is in charge of reproduction, right? And this reproduction, again, this is a property of water. This taste, this water is a property of water in the sense that when somebody is pregnant, what do they say? My water broke, right? So this is also coming from water. And the faculty of excretion, they say, is coming from the earth, because now the earth, the faculty of excretion excretes smell. It excretes smell, which is a property of earth, right? So here, our genitals excrete water, which is, or they release water rather, which is water. Here, our anus, it releases smell, which is, again, a property of earth, smell. So in this way, our rishis say that because they have those properties pertaining to those elements, then they have come from those elements. And that's the logic. So here when you see that shastra yukti bhyam, that's the yukti, that's the logic given to really, really understand this firmly. Now, what's the point of all of this? What's the point of understanding that all of this is actually matter? The mind is matter. The faculties of knowledge and action are matter. The entire world we see is matter. So we will just read this verse, and then I'll do the elaboration next week, just so we can get the idea, Chris. Verse number 18. Ekadeshendriyer yuktya shastrenapyavagamyate yavat kinchit paved etat idam shabdoditam jagat ekadeshendriyer yuktya shastrenapyavagamyate yavat kinchit bhaved etat idam shabdoditam jagat. So it says here, whatever of this world is perceived by the senses, the organs of action, and the mind. So ekadeshendriyer yuktya means 11 of them, right? 5 faculties of knowledge, 5 of action, and the mind. 11 of them, whatever is perceived by them, reasoning and scriptural texts. Yuktya here means by reasoning. Shastrena api, by our scriptural texts. Avagamyate, whatever is understood by reasoning in our scriptural texts, these 11 things, what are they? Yavat kinchit bhavet, whatever it is, whatever these things are, they are referred to as idam, idam shabdoditam, means they're referred to this word as idam, or this jagat. They're referred to shabdoditam jagat. They are referred to this, meaning the world, in the scriptures. So what happened here? Why did he bring this verse? And now I'm just going to show you the Chandogya Upanishad Shruti, the Vakya, and then we will wrap up in a moment. Here. Okay. So what he's saying here is he brought all of these verses from 2 to 18, because remember, in Panchadashi, basically, what we'll find is in a lot of the chapters, he will take one verse of the Shruti, of the Upanishads, and the whole chapter will be on that. Yeah, this happens quite a bit. So for chapter 2, this is the verse that we're studying. Sadeva Somya idam agra asi means everything was sat. Everything was existence alone, this one non-dual truth. So here it says sad eva, true existence alone, idam, this is existence alone. So this word idam means this. This, to explain idam, he means the whole entire world. What is the world? All of the objects, along with our faculties of action, faculties of knowledge, and our mind, our ego, all of it is explained in this one word, idam. And that's why he brought all of those verses in very beautifully. So now, when we look at it next week, now he'll explain the next word in this Shruti Vakya. And this is the thought flow of Swami Vidyaranya. So we will say the closing prayer, then we'll pause for any questions, and then we'll spend some time in silence. Yeah. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Okay, pause.